Very warm welcome. As always, especially warm welcome if it's your first time to Buddhistisches Tour. My name's Tarapalita, and so I'd like to begin with a question. Who of you here has used Kleinanzeigen to buy second-hand furniture? Okay, so there's a few people that understand why I wanted to talk about suffering this week and clinging. But I'm actually not, as you saw in the WhatsApp group, I'm not going to talk about that because I overcame that pain during the week. But it was pain nonetheless, and I might even use it as an example of clinging and suffering towards the end of this talk. It's funny though, because I got really stressed, and then I was looking for Buddhist texts on clinging and suffering, and I ended up finding the text that I'd like to look at today. And then forgot about my clinging and suffering. So that's good. That's how Buddhism works sometimes. So I'd like to look at, what's called an udana. Yeah, it's like the udana is an udana. It's very interesting. It's a kind of nice to find some words here. They're coming that way. My brain's coming together. It's like an expression of inspiration from the Buddha. Yeah, we don't often think, perhaps, of the Buddha being inspired. I don't know what we think of the Buddha. The Buddha's seems quite far removed from us sometimes. But the udana basically means, ud is something like up and out, and ana is breath or breathing. So it's like an upward breath, which sometimes gets translated as like an upward breath of inspiration. Yeah. So these udanas, they're very early in the Buddhist scriptures, and they're very interesting. There's normally something going on. The Buddha sees what's going on and has a response. Yeah. The Buddha has a response and says something, and it's called nudana, an upward breath or upward inspiration. It's quite interesting because I was looking up udana, actually the word, and it's also related to our own, because we say inspiration. When we translate the word udana, we also use the word inspiration, which interestingly is also connected to breath, to breathing. You know, some of you probably know this, but I found it very interesting. Inspiration is from the Latin, in meaning in, and spiration is to breathe, so you're breathing in. So the Buddha's breathing out and we're breathing in, and it's always something to do with the breathing, which I found very interesting. Which shows you, we've done the mindfulness of breathing today. The breath is life. It's not, that's kind of obvious in a way, but it's interesting how it gets used in this context for our deepest response to something. Yeah, our deepest, I don't even know another word. I was going to say our deepest inspiration, which is just saying the word again, but it's to do with the breathing, isn't it? So I don't want to go too much into it, but I guess initially it's like a physiological response. Maybe something happens, and they have that expression in English, it takes your breath away. You see something incredible, and you kind of breathe in. And in this case, maybe it's to do with communication. You kind of breathe out. There's a kind of... but it's interesting. It's very, very much rooted in our direct experience. And, it's said that the Buddha attained enlightenment doing the mindfulness of breathing. Probably not the 4-stage mindfulness of breathing we did, and he certainly wasn't wandering around all over the place like we were. But nonetheless, it's like Lalita Ratna was saying, the breath has a genius, and I think that's true, isn't it? If you stay with it, obviously, according to Buddhism, according to the Buddha's own experience, if you stay with the breath in deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and stiller, it starts to communicate maybe the nature of reality itself, which is not very heady, but it's a kind of that's sort of what the tradition says, yeah. So that's an udana. An udana is an inspiration and maybe a communication, yeah, a verse, natural. Maybe it's poetry, maybe it's prose from the Buddha. It just comes out, yeah. It just comes out of him. So that's one word. The story follows two of the Buddha's two chief disciples, yeah, Shariputra and Mahamoggallana, yeah. So they're in a way, they're a kind of epitome. They're like the shining example of friendship, yeah. And well, as some of you know, friendship in Buddhism is extraordinarily important. The Buddha himself said friendship is the whole of the spiritual life, which I think goes over most of our heads, but it's a big thing. And these two are incredibly good friends, yeah? So they grew up in the same village. They had the same aspiration to find a teacher, a spiritual teacher, it seems. They went out together. They found their first teacher. I think his name was Sanjaya Belaputta. And I don't think they were very happy with him in the end. He was an ascetic, yeah, so a wanderer. And apparently, any question they'd ask him about the nature of the universe, about life, he'd more or less give the same answer, which was something like, if you ask me whether there is another world, I do not say so. I do not say otherwise. I do not say it is so. I do not say it is not so. So you meet people like that in the sort of spiritual scene these days, don't you? Marketplace, where everyone's like, you know, they give you these kind of nonsensical, like randomly generated answers with the word quantum in it or love or something, and it makes no sense. And so they were fed up, basically. And I think they parted ways. And Shariputra bumped into one of the Buddha's first 5 disciples, yeah? So the Buddha realized it was possible to communicate enlightenment, although he realized most of us are just not going to get it, yeah? We're too crude and wrapped up in our own self, yeah? But he said he thought a few people might actually get this. And one of those people was one of his old friends, a guy called Asvajit, yeah? And he attained enlightenment as well. And this guy, Shariputra, bumped into Asvajit and just thought, there is something extraordinary about this person, yeah? And Asvajit was enlightened. So this is a bit technical, but there's only one Buddha. A Buddha is someone who has attained enlightenment with no teacher, yeah? They've done it themselves. I don't know how you do that, but they've done it themselves. They've found liberation. Everyone after a Buddha is an arahant or a disciple, enlightened person, yeah? But a Buddha is someone who, at this time, there was no one to teach him. He had teachers, but no one to teach him final liberation. Okay. Anyway, Asvajit Shariputra bumps into Asvajit. He's very impressed. Asvajit communicates something to him. Bing. Shariputra doesn't get enlightened, but is halfway there. Meets his old friend, says, I found this great teacher. They meet the Buddha, they get enlightened, and so on and so forth. And they become the Buddha's chief disciples. Yeah? And they both have very different qualities. Shariputra is said to be very keen on wisdom, yeah? So he's very good at teaching. They're both enlightened at this stage, yeah? But Shariputra is very good at teaching. It seems like he's got his feet on the ground, very much so, yeah? Very good at communicating to newcomers, blah, blah, blah. Amazing. His friend Mahamoggallana has like these psychic superpowers, yeah? Yeah. I mean, the great thing about Buddhism, it doesn't really make much of a deal. It's just like, yeah, that's what happens. The more you go into the mind, the more you step into meditation and explore consciousness, strange things start to happen. But it doesn't make a big song and dance out of it. It doesn't say, oh... So they were both friends. So Moggallana has these interesting sort of psychic powers, and Shariputra is very much feet on the ground, yeah? This is to do them a disservice immensely. But they were very different, but they were best friends, is the point, yeah? They were very, very different people. Okay, there's those two. And finally, the 2 other characters in this story are 2 yakshas. They don't have names, but yakshas are basically nature spirits, yeah? These incredibly powerful nature spirits that roam around and do their thing, as we're going to discover, yeah? I'll say more about them afterwards, but they're just, they're hugely powerful. Maybe they're just hugely powerful. Use your imagination. We've seen loads of films. We could just sort of conjure up these yakshas, yeah? Okay. So I'll just read it. We'll go through it. It's called The Moonlit Night, yeah? So it begins with, thus have I heard. And any time you hear thus have I heard, it's basically the Buddha's cousin and attendant Ananda, who is said to have had an extraordinary memory and just remembered all these different events, and it gets comprised later on into written form. But thus have I heard. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Lord, the Buddha, was staying at Rajagaha in the bamboo wood at the squirrel's feeding place. On that occasion, the Venerable Shariputra and the Venerable Mahamoggallana were staying in the pigeon's glen. So it already sounds good, huh? I was thinking that about the world being more alive. We live in a very materialist, pseudo-rational world right now. And I was talking to my cousin yesterday, who's a builder and into he's built buildings, architecture. And we've stripped the life out of our architecture and out of our living places. They're kind of, the world is not as alive. But even with these kind of names, they're fantastic. The squirrels, anyway, never mind. It happened that the Venerable Shariputra, on a moonlit night, was seated in the open air with his head newly shaved and had attained a certain stage of concentration. Okay, so we have a moonlit night, we have somewhere serene. The Buddha's not there, he's somewhere else, but somehow there's obviously some sort of connection. Yeah, however you want to take that. And you have Shariputra in the moonlit night, meditating, absorbed, and he's had his head freshly shaved. Maybe his head's gleaming, maybe the moonlit night is bouncing off the gleam on his head. Yeah. At that moment, two yakshas, who were companions, were going from north to south on some business or other when they saw the Venerable Shariputra. I don't know what kind of business yakshas get up to, but they were obviously on some business. On the moonlit night, seated in the open air with his head newly shaved. On seeing him, one yaksha said to the other, "The idea has occurred to me, friend, to give this recluse a blow on the head." Yeah, so that's the kind of thing yakshas do. They see someone meditating and they just want to smash them in the head. Yeah? When he said this, the other yaksha said, "Take care, friend. Do not strike the recluse. He is a mighty recluse, friend, of great supernormal potency and power." A second time and a third time, the first yaksha said to the other, "Yes, but the idea has occurred to me, friend, to give this recluse a blow on the head." And a second and a third time, the other yaksha said, "Take care, friend, do not strike the recluse. He is a mighty recluse, friend, of great supernormal potency and power." Then the first yaksha, not heeding the warning of the other yaksha, gave the Venerable Shariputra a blow on the head. And so great was the blow, it might have felled an elephant 7 or 7.5 cubits high. I don't know what a cubit is. I looked it up. It's a kind of measurement system from ancient India, Egypt, but it wasn't really helpful. Anyway, never mind. ChatGPT has its limits sometimes. 7, or split a great mountain peak. Thereupon, that yaksha crying out, I am burning, instantly fell into a great hell. Not a great story so far, is it, for him? So I don't know how you take these yakshas. You can take them literally. In fact, I would say, why not? Yeah, we've got our own ideas about life, but you can take them literally, or you can take them as sides of your own character. Yeah, sometimes you're there meditating in the moonlit night with your head freshly shaved, in bliss, and all of a sudden you just get a barrage of the worst impulses known to humanity. I think, don't you? Like, it's definitely happened to me. On my first retreat, I was there. It was like a 2-week silent retreat. I was like, I am beginning to understand this Buddhism stuff's amazing. Like, there's me running around chasing after all this stuff, and I'm literally just sitting here with my breath, and I'm content, and I was so happy. So I've cracked it. And then this huge wave of the most extreme violence and sexual craving just burst into my head. Like I felt like I literally had jaws with fangs on them, like, you know, like a huge chimp. And I finished that meditation thinking, I am a psychopath. Literally I'm a psychopath. I was really, it sounds funny, but I was actually worried. Yeah. So I went to the guy leading the retreat and stumbled into, it was a tent, it was like an outdoor meditation retreat, and said to him, I think there's something wrong with me. Yeah. Like I told him what had happened, and he just said, it's just called being a bloke. And that was it. I'm so grateful to him. He just neutralized the whole thing, and then I became comfortable with all these, very odd sides, these yaksha type things, natural forces that just overwhelm you sometimes, rather than being terrified and, but trying to squeeze it out of your experience. It's part of us. We're nature. Anyway, nature spirits, I was going to say, not quite. Anyway, let's get back to the story. This poor yaksha. Anyway, so the Venerable Mahamoggallana, his friend, with divine vision, purified and surpassing that of humans, saw that Yaksha giving the venerable Shariputra a blow on the head. On seeing this, he approached the venerable Shariputra and said, are you well, friend? Are you bearing up? Have you any pain? And then Shariputra says, I am well, friend, Moggallana. I am bearing up, friend, Moggallana, although I do have a slight headache. And then Moggallana says, it is wonderful, Shariputra. It is marvelous, friend Shariputra. How great is the supernormal potency and power of the venerable Shariputra. Just now, friend Shariputra, they call themselves friend a lot, yeah, it just shows how much friends they are, yeah. A certain Yaksha gave you a blow on the head. So great was that blow, it might have felled an elephant 7 or 7.5 cubits high, or split a great mountain peak. And yet, the venerable Shariputra just says, I am well, friend Moggallana, I am bearing up, friend Moggallana, although I do have a slight headache. So he's overjoyed, he's rejoicing in his friend, he's just like, he's seen this incredible thing, and he's blown away that he's just carried on meditating, but just has a slight headache, yeah? And then then Shariputra says, it is wonderful, friend Moggallana. It is marvelous, friend Moggallana. How great is the supernormal potency and power of the venerable Maha Moggallana that he can actually see a Yaksha. Now we could not even see a mud sprite. So then he's sort of saying to his friend, God, your supernormal powers, they're mind-blowing. They're incredible. So they're just sort of rejoicing in each other. Now this might sound a bit weird, I don't care. It sounds a bit like, oh, what's going on here? Actually, it communicates a lot of the spirit of Buddhism, yeah? Like when you step into a Buddhist community, there's a certain level of, a certain level of friendship where people see the best in each other, yeah? Not always, yeah. We rub each other up the wrong ways, they say sometimes, but generally, there's a certain ease of rejoicing in people's merits, yeah, which is something I really appreciate. You know, someone sees something good in you, and they'll tell you immediately, and they'll find your good qualities, and they'll bring them out. And this is like a very strong example of this, yeah. So, the Lord, the Buddha, with divine hearing, purified and surpassing that of humans. That's quite an interesting little phrase tucked in here, yeah. Purified and surpassing that of humans. It's not making a big song and dance of it. It's not saying these people were like something else, but it's kind of indicating that they're operating on a different level. Yeah, and even Sangharakshita, our own teacher, says about enlightenment. In a certain sense, it's like evolution. To say that perhaps has taken us to this point. Yeah, we all have a self-reflective human consciousness, but enlightenment is something else. There's still a human form, and to some extent, obviously, there's still a human consciousness, but the things that we suffer from are gone. No more craving, hatred, delusion, none of that, and all sorts of other things in the mix as well. Yeah. So just this little line, it doesn't kind of pump it up with a load of pomp and ceremony like these people are flying around the universe but it tells you something important, yeah. And it's not just feeling a bit happier and a bit content. There's a lot extra. Otherwise, Buddhists wouldn't, I don't think, really be Buddhists. Yeah, there's something else going on that you get an indication of, importantly, in your own experience. Anyway, the Lord, with divine hearing, purified and surpassing that of humans, heard this conversation of these two great perfected ones. Then, on realizing its significance, the Lord uttered on that occasion this inspired utterance. So this is the Udana, yeah? The rest of it is the backdrop, and then the inspired utterance at the end of the thing is what's called the Udana, this natural verse of inspiration. So he's talking about them. He's talking about people who, I guess, who've liberated themselves, freed themselves, whose mind stands like a mountain, steady, is not perturbed, unattached to things that arouse attachment, unangered by things that provoke anger. When his mind is cultivated thus, how can suffering come to him? Yeah? I'll read that again. Whose mind stands like a mountain, steady, is not perturbed. Perturbed means like distressed, like running about, agitated. Unattached to things that arouse attachment, unangered by things that provoke anger. When his mind is cultivated thus, how can suffering come to him? So, in a way, you kind of have everything you need to know in that one verse somehow. The Buddha's, the reason the Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, left home in the first place was to answer the question of suffering. It was quite simple in a way. He saw there was suffering in this world, and he kind of saw why, and he became a Buddha, and a Buddha is essentially someone who doesn't suffer anymore. There's much more to it, which is why I say it's quite interesting, all these surpassing that of a human, these sentences that, and all this other stuff, psychic power, these kind of things, you could say are byproducts. They're not the main event that Buddhists are aiming for. What they're aiming for is liberation from suffering, which, as we hear, is also liberation from clinging, which is why I talked about Kleinanzeigen. But it's liberation from clinging, It's also liberation from hatred. So I was saying in the WhatsApp group, and our own teacher says, and I think it's fairly clear, that clinging obviously is a form of suffering, isn't it? There's suffering. Things are not really things. Not to sound clever, it's kind of obvious. We're all put together by different components. There's nothing fixed or eternal about us in that sense. We're in this present form we're in, which changes day to day. It arises dependent on conditions, and it disappears. If those conditions aren't there, they go. We don't understand that. I mean, maybe you'd understand that now. I'm saying this as if I understand, but we don't really understand that. We hear that intellectually, and on a Saturday morning go, that makes sense. But we don't believe that, really, because the way we behave is as if things are things, and people are people, and fixed. And we can grab certain things and hold on to them, and they will help us. They will save us. They're like our refuge. They will make us, even if we don't believe it, we act like we do. They will make us happy. If we just had that one thing or that person or something, we'd be happy. So we cling. It's not our fault. It's just the way, I was going to say we're designed, but the way we operate, we cling to things. We cling to things which are not really things, so they're not really safe. They're not really a safe place. We can't really hold on to them. So the Buddha's just saying, if you do that, you will suffer. Just because it's delusional. So you can't help but suffer because it's painful, isn't it? Your heart's involved. You want to grab something, but it's dissolving. The flip side to the clinging thing, though, is if you don't get what you want, you experience frustration and even hatred. I'm sure we've all experienced that. I have. It's a kind of ugly feeling, but you want something, you can't get it, it turns into hatred or anger. You want to break through and grab this thing that you think is going to save you. So the Buddha's basically saying, unattached to things that arouse attachment, unangered by things that provoke anger, when his mind is cultivated thus, how can suffering come to him? So sometimes, like earlier in the week when I was having a complete meltdown with Kleinanzeigen, and I was lying there and I was so stressed and I was like, I'm not enjoying my life right now, And it's because I'd seen all these amazing things, really cheap. I was like, I need that. Tap, tap, tap. Would you? Gone. Oh, okay, no worries. Try the next one, gone. And I was just like, I just wanted all these things. They'd all be perfect. They'd all be cheap. And I couldn't get any of them. Then I felt like a moron because I was just like, I should have been quicker. The whole thing kicked off. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm in such a stressed state. And it's just old furniture, But then I just thought, it's the tip of an iceberg. I do this with all different areas in my life. So this is one example with furniture, but I do it in every area of my life. I think if I just had that thing, or if I just had this money, or if I just had this thing, then I'd kind of be all right. I'd be able to, my work would be done. I can sit back. Nice. I'm done. I'm safe, or I'm completed this thing. But obviously, it sounds ridiculous. It never happens. That never happens. You never, ever get to that stage. So then I thought, it's Buddhism again, isn't it? It's clinging. It's slightly embarrassing. But to be honest, I'm not that embarrassed because I think people who practice for decades and decades, I'm not going to look at anyone, but people who practice for decades and decades and decades, it's still an issue. Because enlightenment, or non-clinging, is not an idea. It's literally a transformation of your whole being. And when you get a flavour of that, like I was lying there and I suddenly got just a little breeze, came through, of what non-clinging might be like. I was like, wow. And I think, like I was saying in this little WhatsApp text, I think at that point, then you start to have a genuine, maybe even profound respect for the Buddha and his disciples, because what we're talking about isn't some kind of little technique that you do over a few months in a course or a year, and then you're a bit happier. It's like you're not clinging, and there's something else in your experience, which means you're changed. Yeah? But it's not unnatural. It's just we don't put any energy, we don't put enough energy into it, so we're clinging all the time. But just that little moment of being free from my stupid furniture, and then somehow that magically crept into different corners of my life, all the other things I cling to, I was like, it's okay. It's this whole business of letting go. I don't mean in an apathetic way where you just let go of life and, I don't care anymore. Not that. There's care, but the right kind of care perhaps, because I think in a way what comes when you're not clinging is said to be freedom, but that freedom also expresses itself emotionally with people. There's a freedom of love, there's a freedom of to rejoice in your friends, no problem, there's no jealousy, you don't have to kind of, they've got something I don't, I want. All this kind of stuff is gone. So you're able to kind of, there's an outpouring, yeah? So, I just wanted to say that because I think sometimes, I think maybe it's just the way my mind works, but sometimes if I'm honest, I've kind of, this whole business of not clinging has not really resonated with me. It's not very good being a Buddhist for however long, but I'm like, not into the not clinging bit so much. I like things, I like all kind of things, and I want to feel alive, I want to feel vital, I want to feel like my energy's flowing. So for me, I realised, it's just a misunderstanding or misinterpretation I've had of this business of non-clinging, because I think in my mind I've imagined a kind of vegetable state, like you don't cling, you're just there, you're like... It wasn't very appealing, but recently, after feeling a bit stressed about a number of things, and this furniture thing being the tip of the iceberg, I was like, non-clinging is profound. It's like, it's so cheesy, but it's true. In a way, this non-clinging thing, you will get everything you want as a result of that, and that's what it felt like. I was like, It's just because sometimes Buddhism gets posited in the negative, non-clinging. Non-clinging, let's be honest, it's not like profoundly inspiring to hear that, is it? You don't think, I want non-clinging. It's not like a huge eros, which is probably why Buddhism employs all sorts of you hear stories about these extraordinary people, with these, that demonstrate what happens when you're not clinging, And obviously, like I say, not clinging is not an idea, it's your whole being. Your whole being has understood something at a deep, deep level where you do not suffer anymore. There is no more suffering because the roots of suffering have been chopped off. You're just unable to cling because you see, and that's what wisdom is about in Buddhism. Wisdom is not an intellectual thing, it's literally, it's like a seeing, It's as if you just see clearly all of a sudden. You say, so things are not things. Well, why would I cling to that then? Of course not. It's not an idea. It's it'd be ridiculous. So you just don't do it. So the impulse is gone. So the suffering is gone. And anyway, that even sounds a bit lightweight. It's like, I think when you sit and look at it, it seems like it's like one of those things that just fold down deeper and deeper and deeper into levels of clinging. It's not just objects or lovers or status or even things like health. It goes down to things like your sense of self, clinging to life itself, it said, even clinging to death, clinging to notions of death, what that means, and deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's why a Buddha is venerated in Buddhism as something so enormous, that sometimes people get confused. They're like, I'm not going to be rude, but I'm going to be rude anyway. But sometimes Christians, I've met Christians that a bit like, but it's just a guy who's happier. Why don't you, Jesus is God, sorry. But Jesus is huge, God. Why are you just worshipping this guy who's and I think it's because it's quite difficult to get us, perhaps to get a sense of what a Buddha actually is. It's a bit more subtle. It's not like he made the world, blah, 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 but the profundity of deeper levels and layers of not clinging and seeing into the nature of reality is almost, maybe it is, a special leap. Yeah? There's a human form, like I say, there's a human consciousness, but there's something else which apparently we all have the capability of, which is something else. Yeah? I'll just leave it at that. Because the more you talk about it, the more stupid it's, the more stupid I sound. So it's just like, it's a kind of, what do they call it? Suck it and see. You to taste it, test it for yourself. And that's what the Buddha himself said. You can have all the ideas, very helpful. Maybe you're inspired, maybe you're not, I don't know. But the important thing is to test it in your own experience. Because that's the only way you know anything about Buddhism anyway. Yeah? It's like you have to, it takes time, doesn't it? You go on a retreat or you start practicing ethics. You start looking at the world slightly differently. You try that over a few years and you're like, am I happier? Yeah. Am I more miserable? I hope you're not more miserable, but if you're more miserable, then you stop. You know, there's a kind of, you have to test it. It's not faith based on someone else's word. Yeah. But it is, that's what I'm saying. That's why for some people they can find it a bit difficult to understand why people worship the Buddha. And they're almost like, well, why do people worship the Buddha? Didn't the Buddha say, don't worship me? And it's like, yeah, of course. But when you get a sense of what a Buddha is, then you can't help but be like, wow, this is actually extraordinary. Yeah, this is extraordinary. I think I'm going to leave it there. Anything else to say? Maybe the other thing to say is in Buddhism you have the what are called the three jewels. Yeah, if you remember anything, you remember this. Yeah, the three jewels are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, the ideal of enlightenment. The Dharma is his teachings essentially to us to help us out of our state of suffering. And the Sangha is his enlightened disciples. And that's why I wanted to talk about Shariputra and Moggallana and Asvaji, because they're just as important as the Buddha, in a way. They're one of the three jewels. And I think it communicates something. It's like, it's basically telling us enlightenment isn't just a one-off thing that one person did, a Buddha, and everyone worshipped the Buddha. Other people gain enlightenment. It's not like they all became Buddhas. They knew who the Buddha was. They're like, he's our teacher. But they attained enlightenment. And the more you read about them, the more you think these are extraordinary people. And it's so inspiring. They're so different from each other as well. Which in our own way, in our own order and movement here, is kind of reflected. Like there's so many people that I'm involved with here that we would never be friends. Not in a million years. Whether it's kind of age or all kind of things. We just would not have. People are very different is what I'm saying. And I think the more you read about the Buddha's early disciples, the more you get a sense of them appreciating each other's differences and really rejoicing in them. They're like, wow, you're incredible, you know. So, yeah, the three jewels are essential. And finally, I would say, like the sutta itself, this particular Udana, this sutta, somehow there's something, I don't know how I read it, but when you read it, there's something communicated in the atmosphere of it itself. Yeah? Which is important. It's not just the word, not just the teachings, it's the spirit of it. Yeah? Like when you come in contact with Buddhism, Buddhism's either alive in a community or it's dead and academic. Yeah? So if it's alive within a community, it will have a certain spirit and a certain flavour. Yeah? And I think these suttas somehow evoke that. They communicate a certain... It's not just a style of writing, but there's a certain uplift to them, yeah? A certain friendliness even, and clarity, which is in the atmosphere. All right, I've said enough. Good. Thanks.